Greetings and welcome to our online Bible studies for the Meriden Uniting Church. In this series we're going to look at the church. What is it about? Is it just a human religious institution, or God's creation, a new community? And the other question we're looking at is the Christian church today what Jesus had in mind when he instituted it? If you did a survey of the people in the community, the average person on the street, asking what comes to mind when you think of the church, what are some of the answers you might get? It's maybe something you could ask within the congregation. What's the average member think of when they think of the church? In Matthew 16:13 to 20, we have the account of Jesus asking the disciples in Caesarea Philippi, "Who do people say that I am?" And Peter responds, "You are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus goes on to say that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And then he says, the gates of Hades, or hell, shall not overcome it. Another version says, the gates of Hades will not stand against it. So what is the foundation of the church? Now, there's been much theological debate about the statement. And in the Greek, as you may be familiar with, there are two different words used for rock. Peter is Petros, the little rock. And the other word is Petra, which is big rock. Now, the Reformed position is that Jesus is referring to the statement of faith by Peter, that Jesus is the Messiah. So the rock, Petra, is the foundation of the church. So Jesus is the Messiah, the rock of the church. Now, this doesn't, of course, diminish Peter's significance and role as leader, but it's the church of Jesus Christ, not the church of Peter the Apostle. Other scriptures point to Jesus as the foundation. Jesus says in Matthew 7:24, "Therefore anyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a man who built his house on the rock, Petra," a good solid foundation. Also in 1 Corinthians 3:11, Paul says, "For no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ." And in his letter, Peter develops this metaphor. As he says, as you come to the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. We'll look at some of these other metaphors or ideas in later studies. And Peter 2 is a key verse in understanding the church. The living stone and cornerstone picks up the image of the rock, the foundation on which Jesus builds his church. So the concept here is that Jesus builds his church or house not for us, but with us. So Jesus is not creating an institution or organization that we can join. We are rather a living stones. Another concept we'll talk about later, which Paul brings, is about being the body of Christ. So it's more an organism rather than organization. but that's another topic. Later in Matthew's Gospel, when Jesus commissions the apostles, he says, "Go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." As the church, we have got these two tasks back to front. We try to build the church and expect Jesus to make disciples. Mike Breen, in his book Building a Discipling Culture, says, "Here's the thing that can be difficult to wrap your minds around. If you make disciples, you always get a church. If you start a church, you rarely get disciples." You might like to talk about that statement later. We need to understand the church as the effect of discipleship, not the cause of it. And Mike Breen explains, if you set out to build a church, there's no guarantee that you will make disciples. It's far more likely that you will create customers who depend on the spiritual services that religious professionals provide. The other significant thing that Jesus says about the church in Matthew 16 is, "I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." Now, there's a couple of ways to read this. Some versions say, not even the powers of death can conquer his or Jesus' community. All devouring Hades will never consume and destroy the people of God. There's another way of reading this. There is a defensive dynamic here, but also an offensive element as well. At the gates of Hades, hell will not prevail against it. So here's a word. Hades is a word for the place of the dead. Some versions use the word hell. Now, one of the ways I have looked at this is, as Christians storming the gates of hell, and the gates of hell can't withstand the attack of the Church of Jesus Christ. But let's think of that for a moment about this concept of Hades being the place of the dead. Now, it's derived from the rubbish tip near Jerusalem, where the worthless stuff is disposed of, even the dead. What some people consider rubbish, others are prepared to salvage. I remember some years ago, you were able to go to the local rubbish tip, and as you're dumping your stuff off the trailer, there were other people salvaging through and rescuing things and taking things. You can't do that these days. But God saves us. He salvages us from the spiritual rubbish tip. And in the resurrection, Jesus bursts into hell to release captives and bring them deliverance. The picture here is of the Christian church, as I said, storming the gates of hell to rescue souls. So why did Jesus establish the church? Today we looked at the point that it was Jesus that established the church. It's not just Christians who organize themselves in a club. But why did Jesus establish the church? We'll explore this a bit more next week. But just a couple of more thoughts. Someone once said, the church is the only institution that exists for those who are not yet its members. The church Jesus established was never meant to stay confined inside church walls, behind closed doors, in fear of being contaminated by the world. I love the statement by William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army. He says, The church exists for nothing else but to draw people into Christ. Some wish to live within the sound of church bells. I wish to run a rescue mission within a yard of the gates of hell. A very significant phrase. I remember John Wimber saying many years ago, he said, God will never let his church die, but he may let your church die. The question implies, or the question raises the thought, is it my church, our church, or Jesus' church? Well, thank you for tuning in and listening. I trust it will be helpful. In a moment, we'll have some questions for you to discuss. But may God bless you as you learn more about Christ's church and particularly your place in it. Here are the questions for discussion, and hopefully we'll have them on a PowerPoint on the screen for you. The question, if you did a survey of people in the community asking, what comes to mind when they think of the church? What are some of the answers you might get? And the second question, what's your response to Mike Breen's statement that if you make disciples, you will always get a church, but if you just start a church, you rarely get disciples? And thirdly, Jesus said in Matthew 16, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, or the gates of hell, will not come against it. And the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. How do you respond to these two ways of reading this verse? Which one can you relate to? And also, what do you think of William Booth's statement? The church exists for nothing else but to draw people into Christ. Some will wish to live within the sound of church bells. I wish to run a rescue mission with a yard of the gates of hell. Have fun discussing this, and we'll catch you next time.